What's up, guys? My name is Marcus Huskins, and thank you for joining me. As always, if you're finding this content useful, please do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, and I appreciate your support. All right, so moving right along, today I wanted to take a moment to talk about how I use the CTC-1 Pro Console Shaper. I know a lot of people are kind of wondering about this. It's worth mentioning that I've done a pretty in-depth tutorial that's available on the PreSonus YouTube channel that talks about the technical aspect and the specifics of it. It's a good overview as well. That being said, I'd rather take a look at this video in terms of looking at how I use it in an actual mix. So I've got a mix set up here. This is something that I actually recorded probably 10 or 11 years ago now, and a colleague of mine and myself were actually repurposing this. We added some additional elements in terms of production. We're repurposing it for placement in television and film. So that being said, let's take a look at how I structure my Studio One song and my mix and how I kind of start using the CTC-1 directly from the beginning. So I've color-coded my audio events here, and I've set them up in different subgroups, and you can see that each group of these tracks is going out to their own unique subgroup. So if I deactivate or hide all the audio tracks, you'll see that we have a drums bus, percussion, bass, guitars, fiddle, and strings. In addition to that, I also have a reverb here. Actually, we'll have a really quick listen to this track. So it's kind of like a Roomba style track, and you know, just kind of easy flowing guitars, and kind of got some fiddles happening in some string section, and we have some stuff happening on the outro as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and kill the reverb because that's something that I don't want to be having in our mix. But it's worth mentioning that with the exception of CTC-1 being on all of these bus channels, and also with the exception of me having an instance of Nugent ISL, which is just protecting me from any peaks, this is completely transparent, but we're listening to the mix pretty much completely raw. So the way that I structure this is after I've got all of my tracks set up, I would pack these into folders and I would link the folders to the bus, but I didn't do that on this example because I wanted to just be working with the straight bus channels. So let's start listening to what CTC-1 is doing, and I'll talk about how I use it. Well, essentially, I'm using the CTC-1 to kind of inflate a set of sounds, and I usually like to do that in groups. My starting point, my default setting, is always with character at 1 and the drive at 6, and it's always with the custom mode. This is my personal favorite. It works 8 times out of 10 for me, but I find that the tube mode is really great for adding mid-range, and the classic mode is also really good for kind of adding like a pillowy low end and a warmer sound to the source track. So if they're overly bright, I might turn to the classic. If they're kind of dull, I might use tube. And if I just want to inflate things overall, I will use custom. So the drums, there's not too much going on with these drums, actually. It's going to be kind of hard to listen, but we'll go ahead and try to find a section. The best way for me to do this is let's, for example, push the drive and let's enhance the character. Off. So it's just a little bit more dull, and like I said, you really need to have a cumulative effect, and I wish there was more happening with these drums to show you, but I've just dialed in something that just gives everything a little bit of a lift on the actual drum tracks. The bass though, or rather the percussion, this is a really good example because we can see what's happening here. Let's bring our percussion tracks into view. We've got quite a lot going on. Okay, so here it is with the CTC-1 engaged. You can immediately hear in the palmas and also in the high-end content of the loop. Could even exaggerate this a little bit more. We'll do that again. So start off with off. You really hear the hi-hat pop out, and you hear the detail of the palmas, the claps that are happening there. So this is a really good starting point for that. Next up, we will take a look at our bass. Now, one thing I want to mention, though, quickly before we go, let's go back to the percussion track for a second, the percussion bus. When we have this character knob, The best way that I could describe this is if we have an EQ and we have a curve on this EQ, let's activate this quickly, and I was to select everything, I can emphasize or de-emphasize based on, moving this sonic fingerprint up. I'm essentially exaggerating or de-exaggerating that curve. I don't even know if that's a word, but emphasizing or de-emphasizing that curve. That's the same way to think about the character knob if I had to explain that. That's kind of what this does. There's a sonic fingerprint that each of these modes have. And when you dial up the character to the maximum setting, you're kind of enhancing that sonic character, that fingerprint or that footprint that it has. That's the best way that I could use to describe it. Generally speaking, though, I usually like to keep that somewhere between 1 and 2.5. Now we have the bass. For this, I ended up using the tube, and my guess here is because the bass was probably a little bit dull. Maybe here. Okay, let's bring this in. Dial up the character so we can kind of enhance it. Maybe dial up the drive a bit. And again, I'm not trying to drastically recreate this sound. I can do that in my mix using EQ, compression, and anything I want to do, but I'm trying to get this to a better starting point. So that's the bass. Now let's go to the guitars, and let's see what I went with here. Okay, again, I went with my CTC-1, and I dialed up a little bit more character. Let's have a listen to these. Off. Actually, that's a pretty good spot to listen to what it's doing to just those rhythm guitars. Here it is off. You almost hear something happening, like a little lift at 10 or 12K or something like that, but it's not an EQ thing. It's like a harmonic distortion or a saturation thing. So that's getting those to a better point. Now we'll move on to the fiddle. The fiddle was a little bright. We'll go to here. I ended up going with the classic model here, and I pushed quite a lot of drive there. It's still not doing a lot, though, and it's hard to hear this. Maybe it's better to go to another section. Maybe we'll go here. Let's dial up the character. Off. We could try some other ones too. We could try tube. I actually like the classic the best here, and I might even push this drive a little bit harder. Let's see what happens. On. Okay, see what happened there? We just took some of the edge off. Have a quick listen. Specifically in this line. Off. On. It's so subtle, but it just kind of shaved off a little bit of the edge, kind of saturated those transients in a nice way. And like I say, this is always like a warm, pillowy type vibe to me. I push the drive quite hard, and sometimes that's what you have to do to get the results you need. Next up, we have strings, and for this one, what did I use for this? Okay, again, these strings are actually programmed strings, so they actually sound great, but just I kind of want to just warm them up a little bit. So if we take a listen bypassed, and let's move to the outro section where they happen. In. Okay, you really hear it on these notes. Off. On. See what I mean? It just warms it up a little bit. Now, I'm not using any noise or crosstalk on any of these, although it could be worth experimenting, maybe dialing in some crosstalk to get a little bit more mojo out of the drums, but that's something that I would just leave for now. I'm happy with this as a starting point. And then my last thing is, in addition to having all of these activated, which are affecting all of the tracks that these bus channels are receiving from, I would also come to my main outs, and I have a CTC-1 on my main outs. This one, the drive is all the way down to 0. Character is at 1, and it's engaged, but I'm not really adding any additional drive, and I'm not really adding any additional character. Well, let's have a listen to this. I can hear the difference there immediately. I might even dial up the character a little bit, and I could potentially push the drive. Either one. I might push the drive and leave this off, or push the character and leave the drive down. It's kind of like 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. You can get similar results by adjusting either one. And I might pull down my master just a bit to compensate for volume so I'm not fooling myself. Okay, so overall, I like everything that's happening here. Now, the main thing that we're looking for is I want to listen to the before and after in a specific section. So, for example, let's go to this section. And I want to bypass all of these, and let's do an A-B comparison of what just the CTC-1 is doing to our mix as a new starting point. Okay, so first we're going to start with it off. Now on. Let's go back to the dry. And now one more time we'll go back to the wet, but this time I'm actually going to bring in my reverb as well. So the idea here is that this is my first step in the mix. Essentially, after I've gain staged, I might throw up a quick static mix, but the first thing I do, if I'm going to use CTC-1, is I'm going to instantiate this on all of my bus channels or my subgroups. I'm going to affect different groups of tracks in different ways, and then I might choose to have one on the main outs, which will of course affect all of these bus channels. So once I get something dialed in, that becomes a new starting point for me, essentially. And then I would just go ahead and mix my track as I normally would, and I could add anything that I want. Like, for example, if I wanted to use the fat channel or something like that across all these tracks, I would go ahead and I would EQ everything as I normally would, maybe choose some of my different modules that I have here in terms of adding different types of EQs. But the CTC-1, when I'm mixing with it, it's always the first step. And I'm not getting overly scientific about anything. It's just about me inflating the sound in a way that sounds good to me and sounds better than the original recordings, after which point I will continue with my mix and mix as I normally would using whatever plugins, native or third party, that I would usually turn to. Anyways, that's all the time I have available for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider hitting that subscribe button. Any questions and comments, please leave them below. I will do my absolute best to get back to you. And as always, we will catch you in the next video. Cheers.